Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because there are people from all parts of the world. I am the chair of Transparency International. I am also member of the board of the UN Global Compact. That's why I have been asked to moderate this session. It's a pleasure to have you all. And this private sector forum today on Monday, as you know, is devoted to the central themes of this year UN General Assembly, which are multilateralism, peace and justice, human rights, and labor rights. And of course, you might be aware that all members of Global Compact has been invited this year to sign a statement renewing their commitment to working together with the UN in the achievement of the Sdgs and the Agenda 2030. For those joining us, I have the pleasure to have here Mrs. Gadawali, who is the Executive Director of the UN ODC. Thank you for joining. And also Federico Bernaldo de Quiros. Federico, welcome. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Grupo Gigante. I think he's joining from Mexico.
Yes.
Ms. Yatola Yagun, who is the Chief Compliance Officer of the OANDO PLC. Welcome. Where are you joining us from?
From Lagos, Nigeria.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining. And we have also Anne-Marie Hall, who is the Acting Executive Director of the UN Office for Partnerships. Hello, Anne-Marie. Thank you for joining.
Hello.
We have Gilbert Wombo, sorry for the pronunciation, who is the President of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. So let's go directly to the questions that we from the Global Compact would like you to answer, and we are interested in knowing your opinion on this thing. How can business incorporate the spirit of this statement that has been signed into their own operations and relationships with the UN and all its bodies, with governments and with civil society? May I start with you, Federico?
Okay. Well, good morning. And thanks to the Global Compact executives for the invitation to share some thoughts on this important meeting, and good morning to all participants. We know that globally we're sailing on uncharted waters, that we have a context where many political leaders in the world have radicalized their positions, and that in the near future we would face shrinking margins and the need to spend in technologies for a touchless economy. In my country, Mexico, at the same time we have four challenges. The Great Reset, as it was pictured by the World Economic Forum. We have very little support to employment and economy from the government. Government that it's threatening institutions and freedom of speech. And the government that thinks that the only role of the private sector in society is to pay taxes. This is a very important issue because that's the actual vision of the government. But even in this context, we know that we need to inspire companies to continue their efforts toward decent work, or not to cut support in this area. Because it's very frequent that when times are tough, that some boards started challenging the management to cut in the investment in these initiatives. Not only in the operation side, but in the supply chain as well. For example, in our restaurant division, we have supported human rights and decent work with small producers in communities nationwide, sustainably, considering economic, social, and environmental impacts in products such as honey, marmalade, vanilla, granola, chocolate, and coffee, among others. So we're going down to the first level in our supply chain so we can ensure that human rights are respected and decent work is respected through all the supply chain in some of our products. And we have started to use some technologies such as blockchain to ensure that this is accomplished. But also, I think that at least in our country, we need to be more public. One possible idea is to have a scorecard that could be more visible to society, so more companies would see that it's time to continue, that it's not time to hesitate or postpone this kind of initiatives. I'm speaking to decent work. So basically, thank you.
Thank you very much. Gada, would you like to share with us your opinion from the UN point of view?
Yes. Hi, Delia.
She's in mute.
Hi, how are you?
I was on mute. So you wanted my opinion towards
This possibility from business sector to transform the statement commitments that they have signed as members of the Global Compact in really putting them or implementing them in their operations and also in their relations with all the bodies of the UN.
Well, of course, I understand that this is not just a statement, but that this is a statement that should be followed by actions. And this is what we expect from the private sector, is to walk the talk. When we speak about ethical leadership and good governance, I think it is very important that this is demonstrated in decisions and policies and translating this in the way they do business. When we speak about invest in addressing systemic inequalities and injustices, then again, this is an area where the private sector can do a lot. This can be translated into equal pay for equal jobs, where we still see a difference of 20% between the pay that women get and men get for the same job. This can be translated into more women on governance boards, because we know that as a matter of fact, the more diverse governance boards are, the less corruption there is and the better the companies do. Availing childcare for and social protection, health care for their employees, so taking good care of their staff, is one way of addressing injustices through inclusive participatory decision making. When we speak about ensure accountability and transparency, this can be immediately translated into better procurement, a procurement that is more transparent, that avoids all acts of corruption. Also in protecting human rights, this can be done in protecting the labor rights, and we can see that every element, I hope, of the statement that was announced from business leaders for the renewed global cooperation is a statement that is indeed translated into action. This is the only way they will contribute into the development and the sustainable development goal. And I think it's the only way out of this unprecedented disruption and global transformation that we are seeing. So definitely each and every statement in this statement should be translated into actions.
Mm-hmm. And Marie, what are the possibilities to interact with UN in this putting into action the commitments of the new statement?
I think there's so many different kinds of ways to connect and co-create. I think one of the things the UN does very well is to convene and to bring a broad spectrum of people together. And what I think private sector can do is to help us harness some of the things that don't come inherently with some of the work that the UN does. And in terms of, I was listening to what Federico was saying about amplification, about accountability, scorecards. We do data super well. What we don't do as well is market that data. And how do we amplify not only what the UN is doing, but what we can do together with the private sector? So if we can get some of that, that expertise and knowledge into these partnerships that we build, so that once something is launched, once we follow through, and every step of the way, we're explaining where that value is for consumers. We're showing them why this track is so much better. A sustainable track, a climate friendly, a green, a blue track is going to be so much better for all of us in the end. I think COVID-19 has given us this opportunity to really rethink. We have to. And what does that reimagined way forward look like? What do consumers, how are they changing? How are they thinking? So we need to know what they're thinking about right now so that we design those kinds of programs, those kinds of partnerships that are going to really speak to them.
Really very interesting, and I agree with you that the COVID, apart from all the problems the pandemic has brought to the whole globe, has also bring us the opportunity to work together for the common good. And the Agenda 2030 is more important than ever, I think. We have a great opportunity to transform the SDGs in really the orientation for concrete action. But you mentioned also two important things: co-creation. Co-creation is essential in this collective action. And I would like to invite Ayatollah to join the conversation, because co-creation has also to do with this idea of a stakeholders economy that we have been talking both at Davos and in these meetings with the Global Compact. What's your opinion on this, Ayatollah, from the private sector view?
Well, I think from the private sector view, more needs to be done to connect the views of business in the incubation process and the conception process. Much earlier than after conceptualization, we're now with implementation. That's really key because the resources are in the private sector to execute a lot of the goals. For instance, we know that governments are under a lot of pressure financially to be able to deliver on their targets. And so it's going to be the work of the private sector to get a lot of things done. And of course, the private sector needs to take center stage and take responsibility, particularly in building trust. And because the private sector is very, very good at engaging multiple stakeholders. We all have businesses. For instance, I work in the energy sector, where we have to deal with government, we have to deal with communities. We're in touch with the communities. We need a license to operate, and of course, we have our employees as stakeholders as well. And we're looking at not just our current labor force, but the labor force of tomorrow. So all the issues that have been raised regarding pay parity, regarding education, all the sustainable development goals, companies are already reporting on them today. But beyond reporting, beyond just paying lip service to the promises that have been made, beyond reporting on what we are doing, how do we ensure that we have a wider impact? And I think this is where the co-creating comes in. The other thing about businesses is that they transcend government tenures. So we're able to manage political risk more effectively when businesses are involved, not just in implementation, but in the creation and the innovation and the negotiation and the creation period, right from the beginning. And then, businesses are able to, because by construct, businesses are also global in nature. Businesses are able to leverage their global partnerships, their global presence, and this can be brokered by the United Nations and agencies. And then there's also a need to get involved more in advocacy and policy in support of UN work. We talk about partnering for the goals, and SDG 17 is key. The events, the global events of the last 6 months have shown us that no one is an island. And what happens in China has an impact all over the world. What happens in America has an impact in Africa and vice versa. And we cannot continue to, as governments, operate in silos. So we can leverage on the global partnerships that business naturally has to be able to, again, move these promises to practice. And and that's what I have to say really at this time. I'd love to go on to talk about, what businesses can do, but maybe there'll be an opportunity to later on.
Sure.
In a more practical way.
Sure, of course. Thank you very much for all your comments. And I would like to give the floor to Gilbert, who has not only the experience of the international affairs and being part of an international organization now, but you have a vast experience as politician and in government position. For those who are not acquainted with Gilbert, he was the Prime Minister of Togo. So what's your view on these collective action possibilities, Gilbert?
Thank you so much. First of all, I think it's important to recall that when you look at the last 20 years since the MDG era, there has been a lot of good progress in terms of the private sector working with the UN system for the common goal. So for me, it's very, very important not to underestimate what has been done so far through the Global Compact, the World Business Council, the WEF, and etc. My second point is what we have been hearing for many years is the fact that from the business side, very often you will hear that financing or the capital is not the issue. The issue is being able to have bankable or investable projects. Quite frankly, that rhetoric, sometimes one can question it because which is true, if we can all testify that this is true. But at the same token, you have so many entrepreneurs, particularly the youth today, in low-income countries or middle-income countries that are doing everything possible to have access to capital without necessarily all the success. So you can see that gap between the capital on one hand and the projects, the entrepreneur on the other hand. It is an element that remains, in my view, today very, very, very relevant for the private sector to really blend its effort with the UN system, with the multilaterals, and in a different ways. Sometimes it's just a matter of investment, bringing the capital, but sometimes the reason why the private sector is not necessarily able to bring the capital is because the investment environment is not there. So you really need to work with the government to make sure that we create that conducive environment to unleash the domestic and private sector. So one thing is to bring the capital, or another thing is just to bring the expertise to help the government in creating that conducive environment. A third dimension of it, very often those entrepreneurs or companies that are looking for the capital, it's also often you will see cases where the projects as they are not necessarily bankable, it's true, because they are not very well fine-tuned. So you need a combination of investment and technical assistance. Technical assistance to help them being readier, making the project bankable, making sure the governance is there. That's where institutions like IFAD or any other UN systems can help with the ground side that deals with the technical assistance, while the business, the private sector is coming with the form of capital and investment. My last point, at least for the moment, is more and more as we move forward, it's going to be important that all of that can also be blended with different level of investment, including the first loss. We have a good experience, for example, Uganda, and now we are working also in Cote d'Ivoire and in other countries, where together with the European Union, for example, could accept the first loss dimension, and that encourage the investor to really come in and invest the money. So I want to insist in the way we can together fill that gap that remains quite huge. Over to you.
Thank you, Gilbert. And before going to a second question that I have been preparing here, I would like to come back to Federico, because you mentioned, Gilbert mentions the conductive or the appropriate investment atmosphere or climate in order to foster investment and foster business. But you, Federico, mentioned one thing, and I would like to know whether this is affecting the economics and the investment scenario in your country. You mentioned the shrinking space for civil society, for freedom of the speech, opinion, the press. How is this situation in your country affecting business, affecting what you private sector companies are trying to do? You are muted. Thank you.
Well, obviously, it's starting to affect it because, well, the first thing that investment needs, it's the respect of the law in many terms, and obviously the republic and all the democratic institutions that make the republic possible. And when you see that the government start threatening the freedom of speech to anyone that criticizes the government, then some entrepreneurs will start thinking twice in making an investment in a country. So this is one issue. And when I talk about the institutions I was mentioning, or I was referring to, for instance, the institution that assure or make the transparency in elections. That's a big issue. The respect to the election process. When you see the government that is trying to make some changes to that kind of democratic institutions, then again, investors will think twice in making investment, especially in the long term. And when you see that the rules are changed easily, for instance, for long-term investment, such as the ones in energy, that's another issue. So companies will, again, think twice before they do it. Thank you very much. We have to welcome Patrick Chelyov, who has joined us. I don't see him, but I see his. Hello, Patrick. How are you?
Hello, Delia. How are you?
Welcome. It's a pleasure to see you again. We met in Davos, I think, this year or the year before. Patrick is the co-CEO of the Chelyov Group. And I always remember one interview I read about you, and you say to the young entrepreneurs, and we are talking about the scenarios for investment, you have to be persistent and patient.
Absolutely, this is a motto.
This is a good advice for startups, let's say.
Absolutely. I mean, in our lifetime, we need to be entrepreneur, and we have to always take certain commitments, move ahead, innovate, create. But at the same time, things do not come easily. Things sometimes takes time to and we shouldn't lose patience and make sure that we maintain persistently our drive and move ahead with it. And sometimes things can take time, but we shouldn't despair. On the contrary, we should continue the movement very strongly.
Thank you very much. Let's go to another issue that the Global Compact is interested in hear you. This year, we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the principles, of the business principles created by the Global Compact. And 90% of the members of the Global Compact have put in place policies, structures, organizational developments. But only 18% of the members of the Global Compact conduct human rights assessment or risk assessment in their companies. So what can business do to go from the commitments of respecting human rights to real action and implementation? Would you like to go first, Patrick, as you have been not in the first
I'm
one?
quite shocked by the figures you are giving, but let us first put things into context, I would say. Companies today, into their way of doing business, into the course of doing business, have a lot of impact on people. They will have an impact on the health of the people, on the mental health of the people, on the safety, on the life balance, on this feeling of being included or excluded, in being treated well or not. And there has been a lot of abuses, a lot of issues, voluntarily or involuntarily. So this is why I feel that companies have to always know and show that they do not infringe all your human rights into their operational. And when they do it, they definitely meet the expectation of their stakeholders. They definitely manage much better their reputation and obviously they avoid any operational, financial, legal risk. Also, I would say it helps them to engage and retain and motivate their employees. And it demonstrates a real leadership and a strong way of doing business. Now that we put this context in place, I would say it's important that we have the right foundation into and the right governance into the way we deal into our human resources. And this means what? This means that we have to get involved and get our senior leadership totally involved into all the human rights matters. It means also that we have to put all the right policies and make sure that they are implemented. And this was the point which you were raising, that often they put the policies, but they don't assess that its implementation. Now, the best way to do it is really to embed all the human rights, to really embed it into all the strategy and raise the awareness at all possible levels. And then engage a dialogue, a permanent dialogue with the different stakeholders. And this dialogue will help to get the feedback, and with the feedback to reassess, to survey, and to take all the necessary action in order to do it. Failing of doing this would mean that we just speak about a policy which has no meaning and which somehow will weaken the organization and the companies by itself and will weaken all the impact which it will give. It requires, of course, a lot of engagement with our partners, engagement with other organizations in order to be able to do it, to compare and to assess. We should be absolutely proud of this involvement into human rights and make sure that any action which is being taken is well accepted and well driven people. So I think it's a lot of collaboration among the different stakeholders which is there, but also some formalization and very strong governance which has to take place.
Thank you, Patrick. Ayatollah, you mentioned in your first intervention the importance of impact on this statement and commitments and all that. And this risk assessment in terms of human rights in a company and in the value chain has to do with impact, really. What's your opinion on these figures I have mentioned of policies, yes, but implementation rather low?
You're on mute.
Muting. Thank you. So in terms of, impact risk assessment in the first place, I think a risk assessment is very important for a company or businesses to be able to identify where they're falling short, because human rights are as wide as, the right to life, deciding you're not going to employ children, to income parity, to just right to fair remuneration for the work done, and right to equal pay. And so I think, first of all, a risk assessment to look at your business and where the risks are is key. And then an impact assessment later on to say, look, how are we, as far as our people are concerned, and not just the employees, but also the human beings that we have cause to interact with, the community. How are our actions not causing harm, reducing that impact of harm, and of course, increasing the positive benefit? How are we positively benefiting? And to be honest, the tone from the top is key. It is important that at board level, at the highest levels of businesses, there is that buy-in, there is that commitment, because we talked earlier about the rule of law, and I was talking about the importance of the rule of law. Where there's no rule of law and people are, where there's an inequality, you eventually fragile society, and a fragile society will create an environment where there is a tendency to be for conflict. And where there's conflict, businesses cannot operate and cannot thrive. And we've seen that happen in Nigeria, in the Niger Delta area. We've seen in the northern parts of Nigeria with Boko Haram, that where there is inequality and there is injustice, that a lot of that being perpetuated by human rights abuses, not just government human rights abuses, but human rights abuses all throughout society, with also businesses as well, that it leads to conflict. And so it's really key that the business case is seen, it's clearly seen, it's clearly dimensioned, and the impact on the bottom line is clearly seen. Yet we are in an environment where it's much more than the bottom line. It's about your reputation as a business, but it's also about showing compassion. It's about understanding that as a business, you operate in an environment where you live in, and it is important to go beyond profit, to thinking about people, to thinking about your planet, to thinking about purpose. As an organization, what is your purpose? And those are all the things that need to be taken into consideration when we're talking about impact assessments. We also need to do a lot of monitoring and evaluation. So once the business gets it, then it's about setting goals that are smart and that can be measured and that we can be held accountable to. We talk about this statement by business leaders talking about accountability and integrity. And so we need those goals around human rights that's a specific, and that we can then look at progress as well through the years. How have we progressed? What have we made? How have we increased benefit as far as human rights issues are concerned?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your mention of the purpose as an idea that has a content beyond earning some money or getting just the economics of the business. And it is interesting because we are coming back to an old concept in these days, which is common good, really highlighting the importance of common good as one of the purposes of all of us working in society for a better future for all of us. What is your opinion on this, Anne-Marie?
So it's music to my ears because I've been thinking a lot about the global common good. And a lot of what we think about is how do we reach everyone, everywhere? But the part we don't often talk about is at the same time. And because at some point, everything is going to reach everyone. But what is that lag period? And whether we're talking about a vaccine for COVID, or we're talking about innovation and technology, I would love to see how we can continuously shorten that time period where everything does reach everyone, everywhere at the same time. The other thing that was really great to hear is just how examples of how interconnected we are, that human rights is obviously good for business. And how do we get that message out to consumers in such a complex world we live in? I love to think about how we can simplify things so that people have some bridges in their mind that they can think, yeah, okay, good human rights. I can feel good about this. I can feel good about this. And we were actually chatting a while ago about having a bar of chocolate and knowing that bar of chocolate, I can eat it, well, pretty guilt-free if I knew that it had the people who had been part of that chain in making this bar of chocolate that I'm so looking forward to, that they have the ability to live and work with dignity, that the supply chain is green, and that how can we make these things simple so that by picking up that bar of chocolate, I can enjoy it from all aspects, knowing that that there are all of these complex things behind it are there, and I don't have to think about it, but someone is, and someone's doing that part. So anytime we can simplify and help people understand how all of these principles and the SDGs are good for all of us, and that we can buy into that, I think those are really good options for us.
Excellent. And I will go to Gilbert, because you are working in a very complicated area, agriculture, land, very much related in your continent with human rights violations or unrespected human rights, at least. What's your opinion on this? And you are muted.
Thank you so much. I just want to start by maybe taking it from where Anne-Marie just left it. You know, that bar of chocolate example you are giving, you know, I hope one day we will have, you know, it will be spelled out, transparency, the $5 I'm paying for that bar of chocolate, how much of it goes to the cocoa producer somewhere. That is going to be the new dimension of the whole reputational risk that we are talking about. Obviously everybody nowadays we are very conscious about the discrimination and the racism that we have been underestimating in doing our due diligence. So that is going to be, so when we talk about the human rights, I'm expecting it to really take a total new dimension. It's going to be broader than what we have been talking about, which is one. Secondly, and one of the panelists mentioned the importance of being able to measure. And I think I told her when she was talking about that. And yet we have some dimensions that are so difficult for us to be able to measure, yet it has a direct impact on our reputation, on the company's reputational risk. So how are you going to handle, particularly in the local communities? What we notice, for example, I was talking about the business environment, or the law may be there, but very difficult to enforce that law, that human right in the local society. So how do you handle that? On the flip side, it will be easier to make the decision that, okay, I'm not going to do business there because I need to protect my reputational risk. So if you're not doing business there, therefore you put the community, you contribute to the divide between the have and the have not, which is also going to our global responsibility. That's where, again, one of the points I really want to advocate is the importance of the private sector and working with the government and the multilaterals. In cases like this, it's important for us to know that, okay, to recognize the problem and knowing that we are working toward it, and to be very clear on that. My last point on that, what we have seen a lot, I was in Nairobi before IFAD, and you know, this is one of the big and very, very, very complicated issue that sometimes also you need to look at, when you look at the your reputational risk from an international, multinational private sector company perspective compared to the domestic the domestic private sector that you are outsourcing to, essentially. So it's not just to have your own set of standards that you want to abide for, but you also have to make sure how that is translated in the domestic and private sector that you are using for. So those are quite very, very, very key. But if I may, is to really advocate for us to look for ways for transparency, moving from ECG, the environment, social, and governance type of issue, and the human rights part of the social dimension management, toward how do we make that public? How do we make that transparent in terms of what me, company A or company C, I'm stand for this, I stand for that. And having everybody, if possible, following the same pattern, so the consumer can compare. When you look at company A, what type of due diligence they have been doing, and company B, so the consumer can also have their say on that. Over.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Federico, are you still with us? Can we hear us? What about this? I don't know whether you are here or not. Federico? Probably there is some connection problem. I would go to the third question, which is what role could or should the business sector have in the achievement of all SDGs, and particularly in one which is very important for Transparency International, which is SDG 16. Peace, justice, rule of law, transparency, anti-corruption. What's the role of business in the achievement of SDGs? I would start with Anne-Marie now, as you are in charge of partnerships with UN.
I think from the very beginning, we've been, just in COVID maybe, I'll give you an example of really thinking about starting from the very start about that transparency, as my colleague from IFAD was saying. So if you can start with that built-in expectation that we're going to bring people together and everyone knows who's coming together and everyone can be part of that, and there's an openness to that, and we can learn as we go and we iterate. We won't always get it right the first time. And I like to think about also how we build on what is these global public goods out there, and how business and private sector can build around it that can be part of their own business plans. And I'll give you an example. And when the COVID-19 first kind of hit, WHO and public health, they came out with these very, very important messages about washing your hands, about not touching your face, about wearing a mask. And how do you get these messages to everyone? And public health messages often can be difficult. And so we reached out to the creative industry and we talked to, and it was amazing the number of people who had the same thought and just wanted to come together and create something. And that goes back to the co-creation. And so all of these different creative, from agencies, from freelancers to platform people, came together, came up with different kinds of messages and ways of talking about these things that would reach different audiences. So they did the audience segmentation and really thought about how to make that, again, available. Not only was this really great for business in terms of their staff being able to be part of this, it was super transparent of everyone who was there, and very strong technical assistance being provided by WHO and others. And so it's really a great example of how when you have all of these different pieces working together, then you can, at the end, be accountable and see what those pieces were able to do and how they were able to achieve and how they were used by that global audience that we're all trying to reach right now. So
next action in movement.
Exactly.
Excellent. And Gilbert, what's your opinion on this collaboration from the business sector to SDGs? Because someone can say, okay, SDGs is the responsibility of the government. You have been in that position too. What's your view?
clearly, I think this is what I want to make at the very, very beginning. Today, to think that we can achieve the SDG without the private sector, it's just ridiculous. This is one. Just like we also know today that ODA itself will not make it on that. So that's the very first thing. And second point I wanted to make, although if you look at the discussion in Davos, although there have been a lot of progress, we still need to work together. What I'm talking about, the UN system and the private sector, to really have a better understanding on each other. I still think that in a lot of instances, we are not maximizing the partnership between those two, critical for the achievement of the SDGs. Thirdly, yes, it's true that we really need the financing also from the private sector, not necessarily through the CSR dimension, but through investment, profitable investment that will contribute to some of the SDGs as they can. So, which is the third point. And the fourth point is the know-how from the private sector. The know-how, not only in terms of the policy environment I mentioned, but also if I think of the agribusiness in which IFAD is, bringing the know-how, the technology in a given sector is going to be crucial for us to make sure that we fill the gap that we have now between now and 2030. The last point, and I'm very, very glad you insist on that, the contribution of the private sector toward what we just talked about, or the transparency dimension, and or the good governance dimension. Over the year, because of their reputational risk, the private sector, I have to say, we still can have issue here and there, but there has been a lot that the private sector has done that put on the table will help government, will really help government that are trying to really show a better picture and a better credibility. If you see, for example, a lot of countries more and more want to have their credit rating done so they can have more access to the capital market. And to bring the private sector experience in how do you show that, from a transparency sake, you respect the minimum is going to be crucial. I can go on, but for me, the role of the private sector is really key if we want to achieve the Agenda 2030. Over.
And it is key also to rebuild trust from society in institutions, in business sector, even in the interpersonal relations, because we are really in a complicated situation, in fact, because of lack of trust between us, between sectors, between companies. And I see Federico is with us. So what's your view, Federico, on the contribution of the private sector to the achievement of SDGs?
Thank you. I apologize. I have some technical issues, but I'm back. I think it's very, very important. And in my country, I think SDGs are still highly unknown to the general public. I mean, they are still only known by a very small sector of society, and from understanding society as government, private sector, and public sector. I think we have to work more on this so society could become more demanding from the government and from the private sector to accomplish all the SDGs. But at the same time, I think this has to be done in a very careful manner, because at least in Mexico, there's a tendency, or I will say there's a lack of trust in some of these initiatives. And it could be very risky that the accomplishment of the SDGs could be perceived as social marketing. And if they're perceived that way from society, then it will backfire. So we need, again, and I'm talking about Mexico, obviously. I think we need to make this available for the general public, to measure them so they can see who is accomplishing and who is not accomplishing it. But walking in that fine line that could not be misunderstood and perceived as a social market.
Excellent. Ayatollah, what's your view on this very important issue, really? You're muted.
Thank you. For me, SDG 16 is foundational to the achievement of all the SDGs, as well as 17, which is partnering for the goal. But I feel that when we're talking about rebuilding trust, we need to address injustice and we need to address inequalities. And you know, we need to understand the importance of building strong institutions, whether those are strong institutions in government, in civil society, or in the private sector, you know, in terms of good governance.
I think she
because that's key to building trust.
I don't know what's going on.
We can hear you. Everyone, we can hear you.
Sorry, Gada, if you can mute your microphone. You were not in our session. You disappeared. But we are hearing Ayatollah now, and then I will go back to you. So Ayatollah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And you know, the Global Private Sector Advisory Group is on the SDGs has just shown the way in terms of the kind of partnership that can exist between government, the private sector, and civil society. In Nigeria, the Vice President set up a private sector advisory group within, you know, nationally to advise government on, and not just to advise government, but to collaborate, I guess, and to innovate together for the achievement of the goals and the targets that the government has made its priority. So I think that, you know, definitely when we talk about doing a risk assessment, you have to look on the human rights sector. I think you have to do that as far as, you know, the SDGs are concerned in terms of what is important to you as a business. We can't do everything. As a company, we're focused on SDG 4, on quality education. We're focused on SDG 16 because we understand, operating in the oil and gas industry, the importance of peace, justice, and strong institutions to just be able to do to run our businesses. But there are other areas as well, SDG 5, which is on gender equality. There are, I guess, our operations will impact on every one of the goals, but there are certain goals that we will take on and say, you know, we want to lead in this area. We want to champion. And so there's a need for businesses to also be a bit more focused in terms of what they want to champion, and to be able to align whatever it is they've chosen to champion with what the national targets are, what the national goals and what the national targets are. There needs to be that synergy. There needs to be that coming together. There needs to be that working together. And so for us, what's important is, how do we reduce the number of out of school children? How do we enhance and promote the education of the girl child? Because those are things that are key to us as a nation and are key to us in terms of our development as a nation as well. And so, again, we're talking about partnering. It's going to be very key to partner with other companies who are also deciding, you know what, SDG 4 is something that I want to champion. Well, why are we working in silos? We need to come together. And that is something that the Global Compact Network, the local network, helps us to achieve, to come together, to collaborate, to come together also with government under the aegis of the Private Sector Advisory Group, and make sure that we're fully aligned so that we can make maximum impact. And again, that can be scaled to a global level.
Thank you very much. And now to Dada, I am happy that you are back to the session. And we were talking about SDG 16 and in general, what's the contribution that business sector can make, or what's the role of business sector in the achievement of SDGs or the Agenda 2030. To you, Gada.
Well, the private sector has a very important role to play in all SDGs, not just in SDG 16. And the fact that COVID has exposed the fragility and the inequalities and the weaknesses of systems makes it of great importance for private sector to engage with government, with civil society. And as Ayatollah was mentioning, to align with national priorities and to contribute to different SDGs. And the problem is that there is no conflict between the interests of the private sector and the public good or the national interest. In fact, doing good is good for business. Investing in education is good for business. Investing in health is good for business. Having diversity and having transparency and having ethical leadership and fighting corruption and upholding the rule of law is good for business. All these allow for a level playing field, allow for employee retention, employee loyalty, employee feeling that they are protected by their businesses, by their employers, so they will be also keen on protecting the business. But there needs to be some tools that are used to really assess the risk and to report on human rights, to report on the contributions, and to report on the actual implementation of Global Compact. And it's not just the business, but the business needs to also be responsible for its suppliers, intermediaries, distributors. The whole value chain needs to be really abiding by the rule of law, be transparent, fight corruption, and contribute to the public good. And this is good for business, this is good for sustainability. Investing in environment is good for sustainability. So it makes good business sense to really abide by the guiding principles on business and human rights.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Patrick, what's your view on this?
I want to repeat everything which has been said. So I would like to the two angles which I would like to take is that we have to all be convinced that the sustainable development is a must for all of us. That it's coming, it shouldn't only come from up to down, from government and the fact we are trying to abide by the rules of law, etc. For me, the pressure is coming from the people. It's coming from our consumer. It's coming from our employees. It's coming from also our aims that we need to create in our business. And how can we create sustainability if we do not make sure that we are having sustainable development into the world? So for me, it's not a question of only assessing risk. It's a positive part of it. As Ghada was saying it, it's how are we going to engage with what our consumer, with what our employees want. How are we going to make sure that we totally are the advocate ourselves as companies, as responsible companies, in order that it benefit to everyone and it benefit to our companies. For me, I have the conviction that any challenge which we meet into meeting the sustainable development goals is supporting our own development, is bringing us a positive impact for us. So our stakeholders, once again, are looking at it. Ourselves, we want to sleep well at night. So I think that we should be the role models which will put pressure on the government and not only abide with what the government wants and avoiding certain risk into it. So taking really a further step down has to come from inside, from conviction.
Thank you very much, and we are just on time. So I would like to thank you all for all your interventions and for your commitment and for what you are doing in your respective areas, because you are not just committing here, you are really working. And it is clear that we have to work together because sustainable development is a collective entrepreneur activity for all of us, for the common good. That would be my ending message as Global Compact board member. I really thank you very much for participating in this roundtable, and I invite you to keep on participating in these 3 days of very interesting conversations. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for all the people that has joined us in this conversation. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Delia. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Delia.
Thank you.